Hello, friends. We are very interested to know which cities you are listening to us from, so quickly like and write in the comments where you are from. Also, share what shocking stories happened in your city or maybe even with you personally. Subscribe because the next story could be about your city or even your personal drama. Now let's dive into a new exciting story. The gravel crunched under the tires of the old Ford as Tom Reynolds pulled into his driveway. The sun was already sinking toward the horizon, turning the sky over Buckley, Oklahoma, warm shades of orange and pink. It had been a long day, like most days in his life over the past 5 years. My hands ached from working with a hammer and saw, my back ached from endlessly carrying boards, but my chest was filled with that rare feeling of satisfaction that comes when you see the result of your labors. Today, he and his team finished the frame of a new barn for farmer John Keller Strong, reliable, with the smell of freshly cut cedar, which Tom loved so much. He turned off the engine, and the silence of the small town washed over him, broken only by the chirping of cicadas and the distant barking of a neighbor's dog. Tom climbed out of the cabin, slamming the door a little harder than necessary. The well-worn pickup truck responded with the creaking of rusty hinges. The old car, like himself, was held together by his word of honor and stubbornness. He pulled off his faded baseball cap, ran his hand through his short, dark brown hair, damp with sweat, and glanced at the house. The small one-story cottage, with peeling white paint on the walls and a rickety porch, looked as tired as he felt. But this was his house, his and Abby's house, bought 7 years ago, when they were first married and dreaming of the future. Then it seemed like a cozy nest. Now Tom increasingly noticed cracks not only in the walls, but also in what happened between them. He kicked off his heavy work boots at the door, leaving them next to the rug, where a pair of Abby's sneakers were already lying neat, white, with barely noticeable stains from walking on the asphalt. Tom pushed the door, and it opened with a slight creak, releasing a faint smell of fried onions and spices. Abby was home. This is good. Lately, she had been disappearing more and more often in the evenings, and he had already gotten used to the empty kitchen and the cold stove. "I'm home," he shouted deeper into the house, pulling his plaid shirt off his shoulders. Underneath, she was left with a gray t-shirt, soaked with sweat and dust. The sound of footsteps came from the kitchen, and Abby appeared in the doorway. Her long blonde hair was tied up in a messy bun, and she wore light makeup on her face, which she liked to renew even at home. She was wearing her favorite blue top and jeans that hugged her legs in such a way that Tom involuntarily remembered how it had once fascinated him. Now he saw in her gaze only fatigue and something else, subtle irritation, which she no longer tried to hide. "You're covered in dirt again," she said instead of greeting, crossing her arms over her chest. Her voice was sharp, like the sound of a saw cutting into an unyielding board. "How many times have I asked to film all this on the street?" Tom glanced at his jeans. Yes, they were covered in dust, and there were dark stains from the earth on the knees, but he didn't see anything wrong with that. This was his job, his life. "Sorry, Ab," he muttered, hanging his shirt on the hook by the door. "It was a hard day. There was no time for ceremonies. The guys and I completed the barn for Keller. The frame stands like a glove." "The barn," she repeated with a slight mockery, turning to the stove. "A great achievement. Do you even realize how much dust you brought in? I just washed the floors yesterday." Tom pursed his lips, suppressing the urge to snap back. He walked into the living room, feeling the wooden floor creaking under his weight. He wanted to fall on the sofa, stretch out his legs, and just be silent, but he knew that this was not the end of the conversation. Abby always found something to latch on to, especially in recent months. He sank into an old chair, the upholstery of which had long since worn out on the armrests, and rubbed his neck, trying to relieve the tension. "What's for dinner?" he asked, trying to change the topic. "Fried chicken and potatoes," she answered without turning around. "Nothing special. We're running out of oil, by the way. I could stop at a store along the way." "I didn't know it was over," Tom said, feeling irritation begin to boil inside. "I'll drop by tomorrow after work." "Tomorrow, of course," she said, and there was something poisonous in her tone. "You have everything tomorrow. and I sit here all day as if within four walls. Tom closed his eyes for a second, inhaling the smell of fried food, which was now mixed with the light aroma of her perfume, Swedish, floral, out of place in this house. He didn't understand when things became like this. She used to laugh at his jokes, make him sandwiches for work, and he would bring her flowers from the side of the road when he returned from long-distance orders. Now, every conversation they had was like a tight string pull a little harder, and it would snap. "How was your day?" he asked, trying to soften the situation. Abby finally turned around, holding a wooden spoon. Her blue eyes narrowed as if she was deciding whether to answer. "Okay," she said briefly. The salon was quiet, there were few customers. Sarah came in and told me how she and Paul went to Tulsa over the weekend. Can you imagine they had dinner at the restaurant there, overlooking the river? And here I am, messing around with your chicken. Tom nodded, not knowing what to say. Sarah had been her best friend since school, but in recent years their friendship had become like a mirror for Abby, in which she saw everything she didn't have. Paul, Sarah's husband, worked as a manager in some oil office, earned decent money, and Sarah did not miss an opportunity to brag about their life. Tom never understood why Abby listens to this if it only makes her angrier. "Sounds good," he managed. "Maybe we can get out somehow too." "For what?" She snorted, returning to the stove. "With your pennies from these barns, we can't even go on vacation normally." Tom clenched his teeth. His salary as a carpenter wasn't great, but he made enough to cover bills, food, and car repairs. Yes, he couldn't buy her a designer bag or take her to Cancun, but he didn't promise her that when they got married. It seemed to him that she then understood who he was, a simple guy from Buckley who liked to work with his hands and was not chasing millions. "I'm trying, Abby," he said quietly. "I have enough orders. There will be another big one soon. Maybe we'll save some money." She didn't answer, only rattled the frying pan louder. Tom looked at her back, at how tense her shoulders were, and felt that a wall was growing between them. Invisible, but as strong as concrete. He stood up, walked into the kitchen, and opened the refrigerator, pulling out a bottle of beer. The cold metal pleasantly burned my palm. He uncorked it and took a long sip, hoping that it would at least put out the fire inside. "Dinner is almost ready," Abby said without looking at him. "Wash your hands and sit down." Tom nodded obediently and went into the bathroom. He turned on the water, put his hands under the stream, watching as the dirt from his fingers was washed away into the sink. He looked at his reflection in the cloudy mirror, a tired face with light stubble, brown eyes, slightly reddened from dust. He was 38, but he felt older. Maybe it was the work that was so exhausting, or maybe it was the house that no longer felt like home. When he returned, he sat down at the table, an old wooden one, with scratches from knives and stains from spilled coffee. Abby placed a plate of chicken and potatoes in front of him and sat down opposite him. They ate in silence, only the forks tapped on the porcelain and the neighbor's TV hummed somewhere in the distance. Tom tried to think of something to talk about, but everything that came to mind seemed stupid or unnecessary. "Tomorrow Matt and I have a trip to the Miller farm," he finally said, swallowing a piece of chicken. "The old man wanted to build a small cottage, so he asked me to estimate the cost." "Miller? Is this the one who is a widower?" Abby asked, looking up. "Yeah, Harry. Good man," Tom nodded. "He says he's tired of living alone in a big house. He wants something simpler." "Well, at least someone in this city understands that you can live better," she muttered, pushing away the plate. "And you keep messing around with barns." Tom swallowed her words along with his potatoes. He didn't argue, he knew it was useless. Abby wanted something different, and he saw it. She wanted shiny cars, beach vacations, dresses you couldn't buy at the local Walmart. And he wanted to build a house. Not for someone, but for yourself. Somewhere in the hills beyond Buckley, where it's quiet, where you can hear the wind in the grass, and you don't have to prove anything to anyone. He pictured it, a simple log structure, a veranda overlooking the sunset, a workshop in the corner of the property. But every time he brought it up with Abby, she would roll her eyes and ask, "Are we going to live there like hermits?" After dinner, Tom put the dishes away while Abby sat on the couch, scrolling through something on her phone. Her fingers quickly slid across the screen, and he noticed how she smiled at something briefly but sincerely. He suddenly wanted to ask what was so funny, but he restrained himself. Instead, he wiped his hands with a towel and said, "I'll go take a shower, otherwise I really look like a scarecrow." "It's about time," she said, without looking up from the phone. Tom went into the bathroom, closed the door behind him, and turned on the water. Hot streams hit the shoulders, washing away dirt and fatigue. He stood there for about 10 minutes, just listening to the sound of the water and trying not to think about anything. But thoughts still came into my head about work, about home, about Abby. Something was wrong, and he felt it. Not just her dissatisfaction, but something deeper. She was moving away, and he didn't know how to get her back. Or did you even want to? Coming out of the shower, he wrapped himself in a towel and walked into the bedroom. Abby was already there, lying under the covers, buried in her phone. The light from the screen illuminated her face, and Tom noticed her quickly typing something before tucking the phone under her pillow. "Are you going to bed soon?" he asked, putting on a clean t-shirt. "Yes, I guess," she answered without looking at him. "Tired today." "Cold," Tom nodded. "I'll pass out soon, too." He lay down next to her, feeling the bed creaking under his weight. Abby turned on her side, her back to him, and after a couple of minutes her breathing became even. Tom looked at the ceiling, listening to the silence. Somewhere outside the window an owl hooted, and for some reason this sound was calming. Mornings in Buckley began with soft light filtering through the curtains and the distant whistle of the freight train that passed through the town once a day. Tom woke up before the alarm clock, as always. His body was used to getting up with the first rays of the sun, even if his mind protested. He lay for several minutes, looking at the ceiling, where a web of cracks resembled a map of some unknown world. Abby was quietly snoring nearby, her blonde hair scattered across the pillow, and her hand clutching the edge of the blanket. She looked calm in her sleep, much like the girl he had met 10 years ago at the local diner, with a slight smile and a sparkle in her blue eyes. But as soon as she woke up, this illusion disappeared. Tom carefully got out from under the blanket, trying not to creak the bed. He pulled on jeans and an old t-shirt and walked barefoot into the kitchen. The coffee maker hummed, filling the air with a bitter aroma as he looked out the window at the backyard. The grass there had long been overgrown, and the old shed, which he had once promised to repair, had become even more lopsided. I should get busy, he thought, but immediately dismissed the thought. There wasn't even enough time to sleep, much less for such little things. He poured the coffee into a worn mug marked "Best Husband," a gift from Abby for their second anniversary, and took his first sip. The hot liquid burned his tongue, but it was pleasant as a reminder that he was still alive. Outside the window, the neighbor, Mr. Albee, was already working on his pickup truck, wiping the windshield. Tom nodded to him through the glass, although he hardly noticed. Abby appeared in the kitchen half an hour later, when Tom was already finishing his second piece of peanut butter toast. She wore a robe that had once been bright pink, but had now faded to a pale shade, and her hair was disheveled. Her gaze slid over him, lingering on his hands, still stained with yesterday's dust, despite the shower. "You didn't wash your face properly again," she said instead of "good morning," opening the refrigerator. "The whole house is covered in this filth of yours." "I washed my face," Tom muttered, taking a bite of toast. "It's just that your hands are so hard to wash." "I know," she said, taking out the yogurt. "This work is forever. Have you ever thought that you could find something better than fiddling with boards?" Tom swallowed the bite, feeling the familiar irritation begin to smolder inside. He heard this more than once, her reproaches, her dreams of a better life. But what did she mean by better? Air-conditioned office? A suit instead of jeans? He couldn't imagine himself at a desk shuffling papers. His place was where there was the smell of wood and earth, where he could see something real grow out of nothing. "I like my job, Ab," he said calmly, although his voice trembled slightly. "I'm not lazy, if that's what you mean. We have enough orders." She snorted, opening the yogurt with a sound like it was a gunshot. Orders, she repeated sarcastically. Barns, sheds, and some cottages for the elderly. And Sarah yesterday told how Paul received a bonus at work. They're looking for a new car, a Lexus. What about us? Are we going to drive around in your rusty Ford for the rest of our lives? Tom squeezed the mug a little tighter than necessary. He didn't like it when she compared them to Sarah and Paul. Yes, Paul had money, connections, an expensive suit, and a smug grin that made Tom wince. But he wasn't jealous. He didn't need a Lexus. His pickup truck took him where he needed to go, and that was enough. If you really want a Lexus, get yourself a job at an oil company, he said, trying to be funny, but it came out harsher than he intended. Abby froze, the spoon of yogurt hovering in the air. Her eyes narrowed, and for a second Tom thought she was going to throw that spoon at him. "Very funny, Tom," she muttered. "Do you think I'm not working? I'm on my feet all day in the salon while you're fiddling with your boards. But my money is just a small change, right? Are yours a great achievement?" "I didn't say that," he objected, putting the mug on the table. "It's just, we live normally, Abby. We have a house, food, and clothes. What are you missing?" She looked at him as if he had said something incredibly stupid. Then she put the yogurt down, crossed her arms over her chest, and blurted out, "Fine. Is this what you call a normal life?" Sarah and Paul flew to New York last month, went to the theater, and dined in restaurants. What about me? I'm sitting here in this hole and watching you come home from work dirty. I'm 35, Tom. I want to live, not survive. Tom opened his mouth to answer, but the words got stuck in his throat. He didn't know what to say. He liked Buckley, his silence, his simplicity. He didn't understand why fly to New York when he could sit on the porch and watch the sunset. But Abby didn't see it. For her, sunsets were just a background, and his work was a burden. "I'm trying," he repeated quietly, almost in a whisper. "Maybe if this order from Miller pays well, we'll go somewhere. In Oklahoma City, for example." "Oklahoma City," she chuckled, turning to the window. "A great adventure. Okay, Tom, do what you want. I need to get ready for work." She left the kitchen, leaving the yogurt she had eaten on the table. Tom looked after her, feeling something heavy squeezing in his chest. He finished his coffee, which had already cooled, and stood up. It was time to go to work. There, amid the noise of the saw and the smell of wood, he could forget about this conversation, at least for a while. The journey to Harry Miller's farm took half an hour. Tom drove along a narrow highway, past fields with withered grass and rare farms where cows lazily chewed hay. The air conditioner hummed in the pickup cab, old and weak, but still a relief from the morning heat. Next to him on the passenger seat lay his backpack shabby, with tools and a notebook where he wrote down estimates and drawings. The radio was playing country music quietly, but Tom wasn't listening. His thoughts were still spinning around Abby. He didn't understand when she became like this. She used to enjoy the little things, his homemade shelves in the living room, their trips to the lake where they fried fish over a fire. Now everything he did seemed insufficient to her. Maybe it's his fault. Maybe she should have tried harder, looked for a job in the city like she wanted. But the thought of quitting carpentry made his stomach churn. It was not just a job, it was his life, his way of breathing. Tom turned onto the dirt road leading to the Miller farm. Harry's old house appeared ahead, two-story, with peeling paint and a veranda where a rocking chair hung. There was a barn nearby, and behind it was a field where several cows were grazing. Tom parked at the fence, got out of the car, and breathed in the air. It smelled of grass, earth, and something else, the freedom that he so missed at home. Harry was already waiting for him at the porch. The old man was short, with gray hair sticking out from under a straw hat, and a wrinkled face that showed a lifetime. He relied on a cane, but moved briskly for his 67 years. "Tom, good morning," he shouted, waving his hand. "Would you like some coffee?" "Good, Harry," Tom smiled, coming closer. "I won't refuse." They walked into a house that smelled of old wood, and something sweet Harry was probably baking a pie. The kitchen was simple: a wooden table, a couple of chairs, a stove with a cast iron frying pan. Harry poured coffee from an old coffee pot and placed the mug in front of Tom. "Well, what do you say?" asked the old man, sitting down opposite. "Have you figured out how much this cottage will cost me?" Tom pulled out a notebook and opened a page of sketches. He had already figured out the dimensions: a small house, 1 bedroom, kitchen, bathroom. Nothing extra, just as Harry wanted. If you take pine and do everything in a simple way, it will come out to about 15,000, he said, tapping his pencil on the paper. "With a foundation, a roof, everything. I can do it in 3 months if Matt helps." Harry nodded, rubbing his chin. "Not bad. I was thinking maybe add a veranda. I like to sit in the evenings and look at the stars." "We'll add it," Tom agreed, making a note. "It's still a couple thousand on top, but that's okay. When do you want to start?" "At least next week," Harry grinned. "This little house is already in my throat. Too big for one old man. Mary, my wife, loved him, but without her, it's empty here." Tom nodded, feeling a slight pang in his chest. He didn't know what it was like to lose his wife after 40 years of marriage, but he saw how Harry held on. The old man did not complain, he simply moved on, and this aroused respect. "I understand," said Tom. "Let's make you a cozy corner." They talked a little more about the details, finished their coffee, and Tom went out into the yard to inspect the construction site. Harry showed him the area behind the barn flat, overlooking the field and distant hills. Tom walked along the grass, wondering where it would be best to lay the foundation. It was quiet here, only the wind rustled in the leaves and the cows mooed in the distance. He suddenly wanted to stay here all day, away from the house, from Abby, from her reproaches. When he returned to the pickup, Harry was standing on the porch, looking at him with a small smile. "You're kind of thoughtful today, Tom," the old man remarked. "Everything is fine?" Tom shrugged, opening the car door. "Yes, it was a hard morning. At home, not everything is smooth." Harry nodded as if he understood more than Tom said. "It happens," he said. "The main thing is don't lose yourself, guys. Life is like construction. Sometimes you have to break down the old in order to put in a new one." Tom grinned as he got behind the wheel. "Maybe you're right, Harry. Okay, see you tomorrow." "See you tomorrow," the old man waved. Tom started the engine and drove back to town. Harry's words were spinning in his head. Silence greeted him at home. Abby had not yet returned from work. She usually finished at the salon by 6, but lately she had been staying late, citing extra clients. Tom dropped his backpack at the door, kicked off his shoes, and walked into the kitchen. The refrigerator was almost empty, only a couple of eggs, a piece of cheese, and a can of beer. He pulled out a beer, opened it, and sat down at the table, looking at the scratches on the tabletop. He suddenly remembered how he and Abby bought this table at the crossroads about 6 years ago. Then they laughed that he had character and planned to polish him, but they never got around to it. The door slammed half an hour later, and Abby walked into the kitchen. She was wearing a black dress that he didn't recognize, tight-fitting, low-cut, not at all her usual style. She threw her purse on the chair and looked at him with slight surprise. "You're early today," she said, opening the cabinet and taking out a glass. "Yes, we finished marking with Miller," Tom answered, taking a sip of beer. "Where have you been? Is the dress new?" Abby froze for a second, then shrugged. "I went to a cafe with my friends after work," she said casually. "And the dress?" "Yes, I bought it at a crossroads. Cheap, but cute." Tom nodded, although something in her tone seemed strange to him. She poured herself some water, drank it in one gulp, and went into the bedroom, leaving him alone. He looked at the empty glass on the table and felt the anxiety that he had been pushing all day rise up inside again. Something was wrong, but he couldn't figure out what it was. The following days passed in the usual rhythm. Tom and Matt were digging trenches for the foundation on Harry's farm, pouring sand and gravel and preparing the site. The work proceeded quickly, and by the end of the week, they were already laying the first reinforcing bars. Harry sometimes went out to look, brought them water, or just stood by the fence, leaning on his cane and coughing. Tom noticed how the old man smiled, looking at their work, and it warmed his soul. Here he felt needed. At home, things only got worse. Abby hardly spoke to him, limiting herself to short phrases like, "buy some bread," or "I'll be late." She left more and more often in the evenings and returned with a slight tiredness on her face, which she explained as a hard day. Tom didn't ask for details. He was afraid to hear what he didn't want to know. But every time she left a residue in him, like dust on boots after construction. On Friday evening, he decided to take a step forward. I returned home earlier, stopped at the store, bought a bottle of wine not expensive, but what she liked before, with a hint of cherry. At home, he put the wine on the table, took out 2 plates, and began to cook nothing complicated, just steaks and potatoes, but he hoped that this would soften her up. Abby arrived at 7. Seeing him in the kitchen with an apron and a frying pan, she stopped in the doorway, raising an eyebrow. "What kind of show is this?" she asked, throwing her bag on the sofa. "I decided to make dinner," Tom said, trying to smile. "We haven't sat together for a long time. Here's the wine, your favorite Merlot." She looked at the bottle, then at him, and something flashed in her eyes, not joy, but rather surprise mixed with irritation. "Nice," she said dryly, "but I'm not hungry. The girls and I are having a bachelorette party today. I just came in to change my clothes." Tom felt the smile leave his face. He turned off the stove, put the spatula on the table, and turned to her. "Bachelorette party," he asked again. "You were with your friends yesterday." "And what?" she said, walking past him into the bedroom. "Sarah's birthday is coming soon, so we decided to celebrate it in advance. I don't have to report every step to you, Tom." He clenched his fists, but immediately unclenched them, trying to control himself. "I don't mind, Ab," he said, following her. "I just thought we could spend the evening together. We haven't spoken properly for a long time." She opened the closet and pulled out another dress, red, short, with shiny sequins. Tom looked at it as if it were someone else's thing, and could not remember when she bought it. "Talk," she snorted, taking the black dress over her head. "About what, Tom? About your construction projects? About how you brought in dirt again? This gives me a headache." "Your friends give me a headache," he blurted out, and he immediately regretted it. Abby froze, turning to him. Her eyes sparkled like steel. "What did you say?" she said. "Don't touch my friends. At least they live and don't vegetate like we do here." "Are they vegetating?" Tom repeated, feeling everything boiling inside. "I'm trying. All you do is whine about Sarah and her damn Lexus." She threw the dress on the bed and stepped towards him, placing her hands on her hips. "Yes, because I'm tired of this roof," she almost shouted. "I'm tired of your pennies, of this little town, of everything. Have you ever thought about what I want, or do you not care?" Tom looked at her, and a lump formed in his throat. He wanted to say that he was trying for her sake, that he dreamed of building a better house, that he loved her, despite everything. But the words did not come. Instead, he asked quietly, "What do you want, Abby? Say it straight." She looked away, as if she had not expected such a question. Then she pursed her lips and squeezed out, "I want to live and not wait for you to save up for some shed. I want to travel, see the world, and not sit here and wipe the dust off your shoes." Tom nodded, feeling something break inside him. He turned and left the bedroom and closed the door behind him. In the kitchen, he looked at the steaks cooling in the frying pan, at the bottle of wine that she hadn't even opened. He suddenly wanted to take this bottle and throw it at the wall, but he simply sat down at the table, put his head in his hands, and exhaled. Abby left 15 minutes later, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. Tom was left alone, listening to the silence. He opened the wine, poured himself a glass. He didn't bother looking for glasses, and drank it in one gulp. The taste was bitter, not at all like he remembered. Maybe the wine has gone bad, or maybe everything has gone bad. He sat there until midnight, staring into space. Her words were spinning in her head. "I want to live. Why don't they live?" And for the first time in a long time, Tom wondered, what if she was right? It's not that he needs to give up everything and chase wealth, but that their paths diverged. It was a cloudy Saturday morning in Buckley. The sky was overcast with gray clouds, and the wind blew dust and dry leaves through the streets. Tom woke up with a heavy head. Yesterday's wine left behind a slight hangover, and thoughts about Abby haunted him all night. He lay staring at the ceiling until the alarm beeped at 6 in the morning. There was no work today. Harry had given them the day off to rest before the big foundation pour, as he put it. But Tom didn't want to rest. He got used to the rhythm of construction, to the noise of tools, to the fatigue that drowned out everything else. Abby was still sleeping when he got up. Her red dress with sequins was lying on a chair in the bedroom. Apparently she returned late, and he didn't even hear. Tom went into the kitchen, made coffee, and sat by the window, looking out at the neighbor's yard, where Mr. Albee was working on the lawn mower. It was a normal morning, but something was different about it. Maybe it was the silence that seemed deeper than usual. Maybe it was the smell of someone else's perfume that he caught while passing by the bedroom, or just the feeling that the house was no longer his. By noon, Abby finally showed up. She looked tired, but happy. There were dark circles under her eyes, but her lips were smiling slightly. She was wearing the long t-shirt she wore at home, and her hair was pulled back into a loose ponytail. "Good morning," she said, opening the refrigerator. "Why are you so gloomy?" "Morning," Tom muttered, finishing his cold coffee. "How was your bachelorette party?" "Great," she replied, taking out the yogurt. "We sat in the bar until midnight, then we went to Sarah's. It was fun." Tom nodded without looking at her. He didn't want to ask for details, but something inside pushed him. "Sarah, then," he said. "So, Paul was at your bachelorette party too?" Abby froze for a second, then shrugged. "No, he was late at work." "And what?" "Nothing," Tom answered, putting the mug in the sink. "I just asked." She looked at him with slight suspicion, but said nothing. Instead, she started chatting about how she and her friends danced to old hits and how the bartender mixed up their cocktails. Tom listened with half an ear, feeling her voice become the background, like the sound of the wind outside the window. He suddenly wanted to leave, to Harry's farm, to the workshop, anywhere, just not to sit here and pretend that everything was normal. "By the way," she interrupted his thoughts, "Sarah is having a party tonight. She invited us. Shall we go?" Tom turned to her, frowning. "Party? You were with her yesterday." "And what?" Abby rolled her eyes. "This is different. Paul will be all their friends. Come on, Tom, let's get out like normal people for once." He wanted to refuse. The last thing he wanted was to stand in a crowd of strangers, listen to their boasts, and pretend that he was having fun. But her look, a mixture of challenge and expectation, made him swallow his protest. "Okay," he said finally. "At what time?" "At 7, she smiled, and for a second it seemed to him that this was the same Abby whom he had once loved. "Wear something decent, not your work rags." Tom nodded, although everything inside sank. He already regretted agreeing. At 7 o'clock, they arrived at Sarah and Paul's house. It was a 2-story mansion on the outskirts of Buckley White, with columns at the entrance and a manicured lawn that looked like it was mowed every day. There were several cars parked in the yard, the shiny Lexus Abby had talked about, some kind of SUV, and a couple of sedans, all new, all expensive. Tom parked his Ford a little to the side, feeling how the rusty pickup truck looked alien among this gloss. He put on his best shirt, the long-sleeved blue one that Abby bought him for Christmas one year, and clean jeans. No work boots, just old sneakers that still looked tattered. Abby looked different. A new dress, dark green, low-cut, high heels, hair styled in waves. She looked like someone from another world, and Tom suddenly felt even more out of place. The door was opened by Sarah, a tall brunette with heavy makeup and a smile that seemed too wide. She was wearing a gold sequin dress and smelled of expensive perfume. "Abby, Tom," she exclaimed, hugging Abby. "Glad to see you. Come on in, everyone is already here." Tom nodded, muttered something like "hi," and followed Abby into the living room. The room was spacious, with a high ceiling, leather furniture, and a huge TV on the wall. There were snacks on the table, cheese plates, canapes, something with shrimp, which Tom had never tried. Music flowed from the speakers, not country, but something fashionable, with bass that reverberated in the chest. There were about 20 guests, men in shirts and jackets, women in dresses and heels. Everyone was laughing, chatting, holding glasses of wine or something stronger. Abby immediately disappeared into the crowd, approaching a group of women who immediately began hugging her and chattering something. Tom remained at the entrance, feeling like a fish out of water. He grabbed a beer from the cooler by the table, the only thing that looked familiar, and took a sip, looking around. "Hey, Tom, good to see you," a voice came from behind. He turned around and saw Paul Crawford. Tall, with dark hair slicked back and a smug grin, Paul looked like a man who knew he was in charge. He was wearing a gray suit, slightly rumpled, but clearly expensive, and he was holding a glass of whiskey in his hands. "Hi, Paul," Tom nodded, trying not to show his irritation. "Congratulations on whatever you have today." "Just a reason to get ready," Paul chuckled, patting him on the shoulder. "Sarah loves these parties. So, how are things going with our handyman? Are you still building barns?" Tom squeezed the bottle a little tighter. He knew that tone, condescending, slightly mocking, as if Paul was looking down on him. "Yes, I'm working," he answered briefly. "We're starting at Harry Miller's cottage." "Good order." "Cottage," Paul repeated, as if tasting the word. "Cute. And last week, I signed a contract with a new drilling rig. The bonus has arrived. I think I'll upgrade the car. This Lexus is already boring, you know." Tom nodded, not knowing what to say. He didn't care about Lexus or contracts, but he felt Paul waiting for a reaction, admiration, envy, whatever. He wasn't going to give it to him. "Great," he said indifferently. "A car is always good." Paul laughed as if Tom had said something funny. "Yeah, better than your truck," he said with a wink. "Okay, relax, take something stronger than beer. It's fun here, don't stand there like a pillar." He went to the group of men at the window, leaving Tom alone. Tom took another sip, feeling the beer taste bitter in his mouth. He suddenly wanted to go out into the air, away from this noise and prying eyes. He made his way through the living room, being careful not to touch any of the guests, and went out into the backyard through the glass door. It was quieter there. The lawn stretched to a low fence, beyond which one could see fields, already dark in the twilight. On the veranda, there were a couple of chairs and a table with an ashtray. Tom sat down, put the bottle on the table, and exhaled. At least you could breathe here. A few minutes later, the door creaked open, and Abby came out onto the veranda. She was holding a glass of wine, her cheeks slightly flushed, either from the alcohol or from the laughter she was bursting with inside. "Why are you sitting here?" she asked, sitting down next to him. "Everyone is having fun there, but you're like a hermit." "It's not mine," said Tom, looking at the fields. "It's too noisy." "Jesus, Tom," she sighed, rolling her eyes. "You're always like this. Sarah has put so much effort into it, and you're not even trying to get involved." "Why?" he asked, turning to her. "Should I pretend I'm having fun?" Abby pursed her lips, looking at him with irritation. "You just don't understand," she said. "This is life, Tom. People communicate, rejoice, and make plans. And all you know is your boards and nails." "Maybe that's enough for me," he answered quietly. "What about you?" She looked away and took a sip of wine. Silence hung between them, heavy as the clouds above Buckley. Tom looked at her profile, illuminated by the light from the house, at her hands clutching a glass, and suddenly realized that he did not know what she was thinking now. Previously, he could guess her mood just by looking at her. Now she was like a stranger. "I'll go inside," she finally said, standing up. "And you sit here if you want." She left, leaving him alone. Tom finished his beer, feeling the coldness of the bottle contrast with the heat inside. He looked at the dark fields, listened to the distant noise of the party, and thought that this gap between them was getting deeper and deeper. And why did he even agree to come here? The morning after Sarah's party began with silence, broken only by the creaking of the floorboards under Tom's feet. He woke up before Abby, as usual, but this time he didn't make coffee or sit by the window. Instead, he pulled on jeans and an old t-shirt and quietly walked out into the yard so as not to wake her. Last night had left a taste in him, not only because of the noise and the strange faces, but because of the way Abby looked at him there on the veranda. Her gaze was full of disappointment, and it cut more than any words. The sky above Buckley was clear, without a hint of yesterday's clouds, and the sun was already starting to get hot. Tom walked to the shed in the backyard, which had long since become a storage area for old tools and unnecessary junk. He opened the door, which creaked with rusty hinges, and inhaled the smell of dust and old wood. Here were his spare hammers, a rusty saw, a couple of cans of paint that he and Abby had bought to paint the kitchen but never got around to it. He picked up a hammer, worn out, with a chipped handle, and suddenly remembered how 5 years ago he used it to make shelves for the living room. Abby then laughed when he accidentally dropped a board on his foot and called him a jack of all trades. Now these shelves were collecting dust in the house, and her laughter remained somewhere in the past. Tom threw the hammer back into the box and sat on the overturned bucket, looking out over the overgrown yard. He suddenly wanted to take a shovel and put everything in order, pull out the weeds, trim the grass, fix this damn barn. But he knew that it wouldn't change anything. Abby will still say that these are little things, and she needs something more. He clenched his fists, feeling his nails dig into his palms, and exhaled. Maybe Harry is right, sometimes you have to break the old to build the new. But he didn't yet understand what exactly to break. Abby showed up around 10. Tom heard the front door slam and went back into the house. She stood in the kitchen, wearing the same long t-shirt from yesterday, pouring water into a glass. Her hair was disheveled and her face was pale, with light shadows under her eyes. "Where have you been?" she asked without looking at him. "In the barn," Tom answered, sitting down at the table. "I thought I could clean it up there." "Clean up," she chuckled, taking a sip. "Great plan. I thought you ran away after yesterday." Tom looked at her, trying to figure out if she was joking or not. But her tone was even, without a hint of a smile. "He didn't run away," he said. "I just spent the morning. How did your party end?" "Okay," she shrugged. "We danced and chatted. Paul arrived at the end and brought a cake. Everyone was delighted. Paul then," Tom nodded, feeling something stirring inside. "I thought he was late to work." Abby glanced at him briefly, but quickly looked away. "He's free," she said casually. "What are you holding on to? It was just a party." "I'm not hooked," Tom answered, trying to keep his voice calm. "I just asked." She put the glass down on the table with a little more clatter than necessary and went into the bedroom, leaving him alone. Tom looked at her empty glass, at the drops of water flowing down the glass, and felt how the anxiety that he had been driving for the last days was rising again. Something was wrong. Not in her words, but in the way she said them, too quickly, too carelessly, as if she was hiding something behind this carelessness. The day passed slowly. Abby had left to run errands, she said, giving him a quick, "I'll be back in the evening," before slamming the door. Tom stayed at home, deciding to sort out the old drawings in the living room. He pulled out a box from under the sofa, a battered one, with the words "construction" written on it, which he had made with a marker back in the early years of their marriage. Inside were sketches, shelves he was making, a plan for a veranda he wanted to add to the house, a sketch of a small house in the hills that he dreamed of. He unfolded the last sheet, frayed at the edges, and ran his finger along the pencil lines. A simple house with a veranda and a workshop where he could work on his projects. Once he showed this sketch to Abby, but she just laughed. "So, are we going to live there like old people?" Tom put the drawings back, feeling how everything inside was shrinking. He suddenly wanted to go to Harry to see how the work was going, but he remembered that today was a day off. Instead, he grabbed a beer from the refrigerator, walked out onto the porch, and sat down on an old chair that creaked under his weight. Abby returned around 6. She came in with a bag from the store, threw it on the table, and began laying out food, bread, milk. Tom looked at her from the porch through the open door, noticing how she moved quickly, almost nervously. "Where were you?" he asked without getting up. "In the store," she answered without turning around. And I came to Sarah. She asked for help with cleaning up after yesterday. Help with the cleaning, Tom repeated, feeling something cold in his chest. I thought they had servants. Abby turned around, her eyes narrowed. They don't have servants, Tom, she said sharply. Paul makes good money, but he's not a millionaire. Why are you starting again? I'm not starting anything, he replied, taking a sip of beer. It's just strange that after the bachelorette party, you also went to clean up. She pursed her lips as if she wanted to say something, but thought better of it. Instead, she threw, I'm tired, I'll go and lie down. She went into the bedroom, leaving her bag on the table. Tom finished his beer, feeling the bitter taste mingling with his growing anxiety. He didn't know why her words sounded so false, but there was something wrong with them. Maybe it's just his imagination, fueled by last night's party and its coldness. Or maybe not. The evening passed in silence. Abby was lying in the bedroom, staring at her phone, and Tom was sitting in the living room, changing channels on the old TV. News, advertising, some series, everything merged into white noise. He suddenly noticed that her purse was left on the sofa where she had thrown it when she returned. The corner of a phone stuck out of her side pocket, a new, shiny one that she bought a couple of months ago, saying that the old one was completely dead. Tom looked at him, feeling something dark stirring inside. He suddenly wanted to take this phone, check who she was texting with when she smiled at the screen. But he immediately pushed that thought away. It would be beneath his dignity. He stood up, walked into the kitchen, and opened another beer. The cold bottle burned his palm pleasantly, and he took a long sip, trying to drown out his thoughts. But they didn't leave. He remembered how Abby behaved at the party, how easily she laughed with her friends, how quickly she left him on the veranda, and how Paul grinned, clapping him on the shoulder. Something was wrong, and this feeling was gnawing at him from the inside. When he returned to the living room, Abby had already left the bedroom. She stood by the sofa, holding the phone in her hands, and quickly typed something without noticing him. Tom stopped in the doorway, looking at her. Her face was concentrated, her lips were slightly pursed, but a faint smile flickered in the corners, the same one that he saw yesterday when she was scrolling through her phone before going to bed. "Who are you writing to?" he asked, unable to resist. Abby winced and raised her head. Her eyes widened for a second, but she immediately pulled herself together. "Sarah," she said, putting the phone in her pocket, "I'm asking what to wear tomorrow. The girls and I are going to the city." "To the city?" Tom repeated, feeling his voice become heavier. "Again?" "Yes, again," she said, crossing her arms. "I have a day off. I want to relax." "Why are you attached to me?" Tom looked at her, feeling everything boiling inside. He wanted to ask why she always leaves, why her phone is now password protected, why she smells of perfume that was not there before. But instead he said, "Nothing. Rest." She nodded, as if pleased with his answer, and went back to the bedroom. Tom remained standing, clutching the bottle until his fingers turned white. He suddenly remembered Harry's words, "Don't lose yourself, boy." But what if he's already losing? Not himself, but what happened between him and Abby, and does he want to keep it? He finished his beer, threw the bottle in the trash, and lay down on the sofa without undressing. Sleep did not come. Tom woke up feeling as if someone had placed a heavy stone on his chest. The morning in Buckley was as quiet as ever. A gentle wind rustled outside the window. A dog barked somewhere in the distance, and the sun's rays filtered through the curtains, leaving spots of light on the worn floor. But there was no silence inside him. The night passed restlessly. He tossed and turned, listening to Abby's even breathing, and tried to figure out what to do with this shadow that was growing between them. Her secrecy, her smiles into the phone, her coldness, all this accumulated in him, like dust at a construction site, until it became unbearable. He stood up, trying not to creak the bed, and walked into the kitchen. The coffee maker hummed, filling the air with its familiar aroma, but even this did not bring relief. Tom sat down at the table, clutching his mug that said, "Best Husband," and stared at the cracks in the tabletop as if they might provide the answer. Yesterday evening came back to mind again. Abby, buried in the phone, her sharp rest, her departure to the bedroom, as if he were not a husband, but a neighbor. He could no longer pretend that everything was normal. Something is broken, and this something cannot be fixed, like a rickety shed in the yard. Tom pulled out an old notebook from the drawer where he usually drew drawings and opened a blank page. The pencil trembled in his hand as he wrote, "Divorce." The word looked foreign, sharp, like a nail driven into a board. But it was right. He no longer wanted to live in this tension in this house, where every conversation turned into an argument and every glance into a reproach. He was tired of her dreams of a better life, which made him insufficient, of her leaving, of her lies, because he no longer doubted that she was lying. The decision did not come immediately. It had been brewing for weeks, maybe months, until last night was the last straw. Tom remembered Harry's words. Sometimes you have to break down the old to put in the new. He didn't know what the new would be, but he knew that the old no longer held. He finished his coffee, feeling the bitterness burn his throat, and stood up. Today he will go to the city and find a lawyer. It wasn't what he had dreamed of when he married Abby 7 years ago, but it was necessary. By noon, Tom was sitting in the office of Nancy Kelly, the lawyer Matt had recommended to him. Nancy was a woman of about 45, with short dark hair and a stern gaze that softened when she smiled. Her office was in the center of Buckley, a small room with a wooden desk littered with papers and an old chair with worn upholstery on the arms. "So, Mr. Reynolds," Nancy began, opening the folder, "you want to file for divorce. Can you tell me why?" Tom cleared his throat, feeling his throat tighten. It was strange, almost humiliating, to talk about it out loud, but he forced himself. "My wife and I, we haven't gotten along for a long time," he said, looking at his hands folded in his lap. "She wants something else, money, trips, everything that I can't give her. I work as a carpenter. I like it, but it's not enough for her. And I think she's cheating on me." Nancy raised an eyebrow, but didn't interrupt him. "Do you have evidence?" she asked, making a note on her notepad. "No," Tom shook his head. "Only suspicions. She leaves all the time, hides her phone, and lies about her friends. I don't know for sure, but I feel it." "I understand," Nancy nodded. "In Oklahoma, you can get a no-fault divorce if you both agree. It is not necessary to prove treason, but this may affect the division of property. Do you have joint property?" "Home," Tom answered, "and the car, my pickup truck. No children." "Okay," she said, writing it down. "If she agrees to sign the documents, the process will be quick. Are you ready for the fact that she might demand half the house?" Tom clenched his jaw. The thought of Abby taking away half of what he had worked for years cut like a knife. But he nodded. "If I have to, I'll give it to you," he said quietly. "If only it would end." Nancy looked at him with sympathy, but said nothing. She gave him paperwork, a divorce petition, several forms, and explained what he needed to fill out. Tom signed them there, feeling the pencil slide across the paper, leaving marks that crossed out 7 years of his life. When he left the office, the sun was already setting, and the air smelled of dust and grass. He got into the pickup truck, threw a folder of documents onto the passenger seat, and exhaled. Now I had to tell Abby. The house greeted him with silence. Abby was in the kitchen when he came in, standing at the stove, stirring something in a pan. She was wearing the same black cutout dress he had seen before, and her hair was styled as if she was going somewhere. Tom stood in the doorway, holding a folder in his hands, and felt his heart pounding in his chest. "Abby," he said, trying to keep his voice level, "we need to talk." She turned around, raising an eyebrow. Her gaze slid over the folder, then back to his face. "About what?" she asked, turning off the stove. "Are you complaining again?" "No," he shook his head. "I filed for divorce. Here are the documents." Abby froze, her eyes widened for a second, and Tom prepared for anything: tears, screams, reproaches. But instead, she suddenly smiled briefly, coldly, almost triumphantly. "Seriously," she said, crossing her arms. "Well, finally. I thought you would never make up your mind." Tom looked at her, feeling how cold everything inside was. He expected resistance, pain, at least something human, but her reaction was like a blow to the gut. "Do you mind?" he asked, trying not to show confusion. Against, she laughed, and this laugh was sharp, like the sound of a saw on metal. "Yes, I'm just glad, Tom. It's high time. Where do I sign?" She walked over to the desk, snatched the folder from his hands, and opened it, flipping through the papers as quickly as if it was a grocery bill rather than the end of their marriage. Tom stood motionless while she took a pen out of her purse and signed it sweepingly, confidently, without a shadow of a doubt. "That's it," she said, throwing her pen on the table. "Freedom. I can finally get what I deserve. Better life, Vol. And you sit here, build your sheds, live as you want." He clenched his fists, feeling the blood pounding in his temples. Her words were like a slap in the face, but he forced himself to ask. "It's because of him, right? Because of someone else?" Abby looked at him, and her smile widened, almost evil. "Did you think I was just running around with my friends?" she said, leaning closer. "Yes, Tom. There is someone. Brad, Paul's friend. Rich, successful, and he's much better in bed than you. So thanks for letting me go. Now I can truly live." Tom felt the ground disappear from under his feet. Her words burned like a hot nail driven straight into the chest. He knew that she was moving away, suspected betrayal, but to hear it like this cynically, with a grin, without a drop of regret, was beyond his strength. He's fromy closed my mouth to say something, but my voice disappeared. Instead, he simply nodded, as if accepting the inevitable. "Go away," he finally squeezed out, pointing to the door. "Today." "With pleasure," she said, grabbing her purse. "I was planning on it anyway. Brad is waiting. His house is 3 times the size of this hole." She walked past him, brushing her shoulder, and headed into the bedroom. Tom heard her packing her things, the rustle of clothes, the click of heels, the jingle of keys. He stood in the middle of the kitchen, looking at the signed papers, and felt like everything was collapsing inside. Not because he loved her, love burned out long ago, but because she so easily destroyed everything they had. 7 years, house, promises, all this meant nothing to her. Abby came out 10 minutes later with a suitcase in her hands. She was wearing a coat he didn't recognize and heels. She stopped at the door, giving him one last look. "Don't be bored, Tom," she said mockingly. "Live here as you wish." And I went where I was valued. The morning after Abby left was gray, as if the sky above Buckley had decided to reflect what was going on inside Tom. He woke up on the couch where he had fallen asleep with an empty bottle of beer in his hand, and the first thing he felt was silence. Not just the absence of sound, but an emptiness that filled the house like a cold wind through the cracks of an old barn. Abby was gone, and her absence felt like a missing piece of wall in an unfinished cottage. Tom stood up, rubbing his sore neck, and walked into the kitchen. The pot of her soup was still on the stove, cold and untouched, and the signed divorce papers lay nearby. He looked at them, at her sweeping signature, and felt the pain flare up inside again, not from love, but from humiliation. Her words, "Brad is better in bed. I'll get what I deserve," replayed in my head like a broken record. He clenched his fists, then exhaled and threw the pan in the trash along with the soup. Enough. She's gone, and he's not going to cling to her shadow. The first thing he did was take a screwdriver and go to the front door. Changing the locks was a simple matter. He took out the old cylinder, replaced it with a new one that he bought a couple of months ago just in case, and checked the key. The click of the lock sounded like a period at the end of a sentence. Now she won't come back even if she wants to. Tom didn't know if he wanted this himself, but he was sure of one thing: she wouldn't set foot here again. Then he went into the bedroom. Her things were gone, the closet was half empty. Only a few old t-shirts and a couple of dresses that she hadn't picked up were hanging forlornly on hangers. Tom tore them off the hooks and threw them into the trash bag along with her cosmetics, left on the nightstand, and some fashion magazine she read in the evenings. He moved quickly, almost furiously, as if clearing not only the house, but also himself of her presence. When the bag was full, he took it outside and tossed it into the trash can, feeling some of the tension in his shoulders release. The house became different, empty but clean, like a site before a construction site. Tom sat down on the sofa, looking at the bare walls, and breathed freely for the first time in a long time. There was no longer any need to wait for her reproaches, her departures, her lies. He was alone, and it was frightening, but at the same time it brought strange relief. By noon he decided that he could no longer sit at home. Work was his salvation, always had been. He packed his backpack with his tools, put on his baseball cap, and drove to Harry's farm. There, among the smell of wood and earth, he could forget about what happened yesterday. Harry met him at the porch, leaning on his cane. The old man looked as usual, straw hat, faded shirt, wrinkled face with a good-natured smile, but his gaze was attentive, as if he had immediately noticed something about Tom. "Why are you so early today?" he asked, nodding toward the pickup truck. "I thought you and Matt would start tomorrow." "I decided not to wait," Tom answered, getting out of the car. "We need to check the foundation, and I want to do something." Harry narrowed his eyes at him. "Something's wrong at home, isn't it?" he asked quietly. "You look like you were kicked by a cow." Tom grinned, but the laugh came out bitter. "Abby's gone," he said, looking toward the field. "I filed for divorce. She was happy. She said she found someone better." Harry whistled, shaking his head. "Here you go," he muttered. "Well, she's a fool. Forgive me for being so direct. How are you?" "Okay," Tom shrugged, although it was a lie. "I'll survive. The main thing is that there is work." "Work is good," Harry nodded. "But don't bury your head in it, boy. Life is not just made up of boards." Tom nodded without arguing and walked towards the area where he and Matt were marking the foundation. He took a shovel and began to level the edges of the trench, feeling how physical labor was crowding out thoughts. Each blow of the shovel was like a blow to the past, hard but liberating. Harry looked at him from afar, then went into the house and returned with a jug of water. "Here, have a drink," he said, putting the jug on the barrel. "And don't drive yourself like that. Everything is cash hellish." Tom drank, feeling the cold water wash away the dust from his throat. He didn't know if things would get better, but here on the farm, with a shovel in his hands, at least he could breathe. By evening, he finished checking the markings and returned home. The emptiness of the house no longer frightened him. It became part of his new reality. He made himself some coffee, sat on the porch, and watched the sunset, thinking that he was now free. Free but lonely. And it was a strange feeling that he had not yet understood. It's been a week since Abby left. Tom got used to being alone faster than he expected. In the morning, he got up, made coffee, went to Harry's farm, worked until sunset, returned home, and fell on the sofa with a bottle of beer. It was a simple rhythm, almost like at a construction site, step by step, without unnecessary thoughts. The divorce papers lay with Nancy, the process went on as usual, and Tom tried not to think about what Abby said that last evening. But her words still surfaced sometimes like splinters under the skin, and he drove them away, loading himself with work. At the farm, Harry's cottage was beginning to take shape. She and Matt poured the foundation, reinforced it with rebar, and were now getting ready to put up the frame. Matt was in his repertoire telling jokes, singing country music, telling how he almost fell down the stairs last weekend while trying to fix his aunt's roof. Tom listened to his chatter, sometimes smiled, but mostly remained silent. He liked that Matt didn't bother with questions about the divorce. The guy was just doing his job, and that was enough. That day, around noon, Tom noticed an unfamiliar car in the driveway of the farm, an old Volkswagen Beetle, painted bright green. He stopped, wiping sweat from his face with his sleeve, and watched as the girl got out of the car. She was short, with dark brown hair tied in a messy bun, and wearing simple clothes, jeans, a white t-shirt, sneakers. There was a bag hanging over his shoulder, with brushes and pencils sticking out of it. She looked around, noticed Tom, and smiled openly, without a trace of tension. "Hello," she said, coming closer. "You must be Tom? Grandpa told me about you." Tom nodded, a little confused. "Yes, I'm Tom," he answered, putting the shovel on the ground. "Who are you?" Alice, she said, holding out her hand. Harry's granddaughter. I came for a couple of weeks to visit him. Tom shook her hand, feeling how warm and slightly rough her palm was, probably from working with paints. Her eyes, green with golden sparkles, looked at him with curiosity, and he suddenly caught himself thinking that he had not seen such a sincere look for a long time. Nice to meet you, he said, releasing her hand. Harry's in the house, if anything happens. Thank you, she smiled. I saw you digging around here. Are you building a cottage for your grandfather? Yeah, Tom nodded. The foundation has already been poured. We'll be putting up the frame soon. Cool, she said, looking around the area. I'm an artist. I love it when people make things with their own hands. It's like painting, only from wood. Tom grinned. Her words seemed unexpectedly close to him. You could say that, he replied, but there's no need for paint here. Well, it depends, she winked. I'll go to my grandfather and you work. Maybe we'll see you again. She went to the house, and Tom returned to the shovel, but her smile remained in his head. There was something light and warm about her that he had not felt for a long time. He shook his head, clearing away the thoughts, and continued working. Harry left half an hour later with Alice. They were carrying a tray of sandwiches and a pitcher of lemonade. The old man had clearly decided to take a break. Tom and Matt sat down on a barrel, Harry sat down on an old chair, and Alice leaned against the fence, holding a glass in her hands. Alice will be here helping me with the farm, Harry said, taking a bite of his sandwich. Otherwise, I'm not as quick as I used to be. Don't be too poor, grandfather, Alice laughed. You will outlive us all. We'll see, Harry grinned, looking at Tom. How are you, Guy? Everything is fine. Tom nodded, swallowing a piece of ham bread. Yes, okay, he said. Work is underway. Harry looked at him carefully, but did not question him. Alice, however, could not resist. Grandfather said you were a carpenter, she said, looking at Tom. How long have you been doing this? About 5 years, he answered, feeling how for some reason her interest warmed. Before that, I was in the army. Then I came back here and started building. Cool, she nodded. I live in the city of Tulsa, but I love coming here. It's quiet here, you can draw and think. What are you drawing? Tom asked, surprised at his own curiosity. Landscapes mostly, she said, smiling. Hills, rivers, sunsets. Sometimes people, if the mood is there. Maybe you can draw us, Matt chimed in, grinning. 2 handsome guys from a construction site. We'll see, Alice laughed. If you behave well. They sat for a while longer, chatting about little things. Alice told how she once spilled paint on sand. The floor in his workshop took a week to clean, and Harry remembered how he built a barn and almost nailed his finger. Tom listened, occasionally putting in a few words, and felt the tension of the last few days' release. There was something simple and real about Alice, like a freshly cut tree, and he liked it. When they finished lunch, Alice went into the house with Harry, and Tom and Matt went back to work. But her voice light, with a soft laugh, remained with him until the end of the day. He was not looking for anything new, did not want to rush things, but the meeting with her left a faint light in him, like a ray of sunshine in a dark room. In the evening, returning home, he sat on the porch with a beer and looked at the sunset. For the first time in a week, he didn't think about Abby. Instead, Alice's green eyes and her words about sunsets flashed through my head. Maybe Harry was right, life isn't all planks, and maybe there is still room for something good in it. Abby woke up in a spacious bedroom overlooking a neatly trimmed lawn and a pool sparkling in the morning sun. Brad's house was in the suburbs of Tulsa, a white mansion with columns, huge windows, and a 3-car garage. She stretched, feeling the softness of the silk sheets under her fingers, and smiled. This was the life she dreamed of, the life Tom could never give her. No creaky floors, no old pickup trucks, no dust from his work boots. Only luxury, comfort, and the feeling that she is finally in her place. It's been a week since she signed the divorce papers and left with Brad. Everything happened quickly. He was waiting for her at the house in his black Mercedes, helped her throw her suitcase into the trunk, and took her here, to this world, where everything glittered and smelled of money. Abby remembered Tom's face that evening, his shock, his silence when she told him what she had said about Brad. She didn't care. Let him sit in his Buckley, dig in the dirt, and build his sheds. She was now free, and her future looked bright, like the lights of the city at night. Brad had already left for work. He was a partner in some law firm, about which Abby only knew that they paid a lot. She stood up, put on the robe, soft, white, with the initials BK embroidered on it, which he had given her, and went down to the kitchen. Everything there was made of stainless steel: a stove, a refrigerator, a coffee machine, which probably cost more than her entire old house with Tom. Abby made herself a latte, feeling like she was in some movie, and sat at the counter, scrolling through her phone. Sarah has already written. "How are things in paradise?" Abby replied with a heart emoji and a photo of the pool taken yesterday. Let him be jealous. Let everyone see how she rose. The day passed in pleasant laziness. She went to the spa. Brad left her a credit card with a note that said, "Have fun," bought a couple of dresses at a boutique where the saleswoman smiled as if she were an important person, and had lunch at a restaurant overlooking the river. The food was fancy, something with salmon and a sauce she couldn't remember the name of, and it cost more than she and Tom spent on food that week. Abby took a photo and sent it to Sarah, adding, "This is life." She loved this feeling of being taller, better than before. That evening, Brad returned home with a bottle of champagne and a box of oysters. He was tall, with dark hair and sharp cheekbones, and there was always something casually chic about his suits that drove her crazy. They had dinner on the pool deck, laughed, drank, and then he took her upstairs to the bedroom, where everything was fast, hot, and not at all like with Tom. Abby lay there afterwards, looking at the ceiling, thinking she had made the right choice. Brad was everything she needed: rich, confident, passionate. She was finally living and not vegetating. But there were moments that she tried not to notice. For example, how Brad left in the morning without even saying goodbye, leaving only a note. Or how last night, when she started talking about a weekend trip, he changed the subject as if he hadn't heard. Or how he sometimes looked at her not with warmth, but with slight interest, like at a new toy that he had not yet fully unpacked. Abby pushed those thoughts away. It's just addictive, she told herself. He's busy, he's important, and she's part of his world now. Everything will be fine. A couple of days later, they went to a party with Brad's friends, another luxurious house, even more champagne, even louder music. Abby put on one of the new dresses, red, tight, with a low neckline, and felt like a queen. People around her smiled, men glanced, women whispered, and she basked in this attention. Brad was nearby, holding her by the waist, introducing her to friends. "This is Abby, my new star." She laughed, drank, danced, and everything was like a dream. But by the end of the evening, she noticed how he walked away to a group of men, leaving her alone. She stood at the bar, holding a glass, and suddenly heard a fragment of conversation, a female voice, harsh and mocking. "Brad and this blonde? Give him a couple of weeks, he'll find a new one." Abby turned around, but didn't understand who said it. The word stung, but she shrugged it off. Envy, she decided. They're just jealous. When they returned home, Brad was silent. He went to bed without even hugging her, and Abby remained sitting on the edge of the bed, looking at her reflection in the mirror. Her makeup was a little smudged, but she still looked beautiful. This was the beginning, she told herself. Just a start. Tom stood by the river, watching the water quietly splash against the stones. It was evening. The sun was setting, painting the sky in orange and pink tones. He had come here after working on Harry's farm. The riverside property was not far from Buckley, and he sometimes came here to sit in silence. This place calmed him, like the smell of freshly cut wood or the sound of a hammer on a nail. 2 weeks had passed since Abby left, and he was still getting used to his new life, lonely but free. Work on Harry's cottage was in full swing. He and Matt had raised the frame, reinforced the walls, and now Tom was figuring out how to put on the roof. Harry was happy, often going out to watch, bringing lemonade, or just sitting on the porch, telling stories from the past. But in the last few days, Alice had joined them, and that changed everything. Alice was like a breath of fresh air. She came to visit her grandfather for a couple of weeks, but stayed longer, helping him on the farm and sometimes stopping by at the construction site. Her presence was unobtrusive, but noticeable. She could sit for hours on a barrel with an album in her hands, drawing sketches of the cottage, or ask Tom questions about how he chooses a tree or why the foundation is poured that way. Her curiosity did not irritate, but on the contrary, warmed her like a ray of sunshine on a cold day. Today she was with them again. After dinner, when Matt went home and Harry went into the house, Alice stayed. She sat on the grass, cross-legged, and painted the sunset over the field. Tom finished checking the beams and walked over to her, wiping his hands on his jeans. "What are you drawing?" he asked, sitting down next to her. She raised her eyes and smiled that warm, open smile that had already become familiar to him. "Here," she said, showing the album, "field and sky. I want to catch this light. It's so soft today." Tom looked at the drawing pencil lines, soft strokes, shades of orange and blue, applied in pastel. It was beautiful, simple, but with a soul like her voice. "Great," he said, feeling that the words sounded too spare. "You have talent." "Thank you," she replied, closing the album. "And you have a talent for building. This cottage already looks like a house, and not just a pile of boards." Tom grinned, looking at his hands calloused, with dirt embedded under the nails. "It's just a job," he said. "But yeah, I like to see it grow." They were silent for a moment, listening to the wind rustle in the grass. Alice looked at him, her green eyes sparkling in the sunset light. "Grandfather said you recently got divorced," she said quietly, without pressure. "You don't want to talk about it, I understand, but how are you?" Tom froze, not expecting the question. He wasn't used to talking about himself, especially with someone he barely knew. But there was no pity in her voice, only sincere interest, and this disarmed him. "Okay," he answered, looking at the river. "She left, I stayed. She said she found someone better. It was painful, but now it's easier." Alice nodded as if she understood more than he said. "Sometimes people leave to make way for something new," she said. "I had a boyfriend in Tulsa who also left me. I was angry, and then I realized that I was better off without him." Tom looked at her, feeling her words resonate. He suddenly wanted to tell more, but he restrained himself. "Maybe you're right," he said instead. "Let's see what happens." She smiled, and they fell silent again, but this silence was cozy, like a warm evening. Then Alice stood up, dusting off her jeans. "Shall we go to the river?" she suggested. "I want to wet my feet while it's still light." Tom nodded, and they went down to the water. Alice kicked off her sneakers, rolled up her jeans, and walked into the river, laughing as the cold touched her feet. Tom looked at her, feeling something in his chest thaw. He did not take off his shoes, but sat on the shore, watching her splash with water, watching the sunset reflect in her hair. It was simple but beautiful, and for the first time in a long time, he wasn't thinking about Abby. They spent an hour there, chatting about little things, her paintings, his construction projects, how Harry had once caught a fish the size of his hand and was still bragging about it. When the sun set, they returned to the farm and Alice said goodbye as she went into the house. "See you tomorrow," she said, waving her hand. "See you," Tom replied, getting into the pickup. He drove home, feeling a lightness that was not there before. Alice was not like Abby. She had neither a hint of arrogance nor a desire for something more. She was real, and it attracted him like a magnet. He was in no hurry, did not want to make plans, but knew one thing. He felt good next to her. The year flew by like the wind across Buckley's fields, leaving behind the dust of memories and the smell of freshly cut grass. Tom stood on the porch of his old house. The sun was already setting, painting the sky crimson, and a light breeze moved the curtains in the open windows. The house was empty, the furniture had been removed, the walls were bare, and only the faint smell of old wood hung in the air. Today he signed the sale papers, and the place was no longer his. It's been a year since Abby left, slamming the door and throwing her cynical words about Brad in his face. The divorce was filed quickly. She did not argue, did not cling to the property. She simply took half of the money from the sale of the car and disappeared into her new life. Tom heard from Matt that she lived in Tulsa with Brad in some luxurious house, but he didn't know the details and didn't want to know. Her departure left a wound in him, but time and work did their job. The wound healed, turning into a hard scar that no longer hurt, but simply reminded of what had happened. He walked inside, walking on the bare floors. The living room where he and Abby watched TV in the evenings looked foreign without the sofa and the old rug. The kitchen, where he made coffee and listened to her reproaches, was now just a room with empty cabinets. The bedroom where he had once slept next to her, and then alone, seemed too big without the bed and her things. Tom stood at the window, looking out at the backyard overgrown with a rickety shed that he never fixed. This was his home, but it had long ceased to be a home. Selling was not an easy decision. He thought about it for months, weighing whether to cling to the walls that held so many memories. But every time he came back here after work, he felt trapped, not because of Abby, but because of who he was with her. This house was part of their marriage, their fights, their lies, and Tom realized that he no longer wanted to live in the past. He wanted something new, his own, clean, like a fresh sheet of paper in front of a drawing. The realtor, Mrs. Rose, an elderly lady with a kind smile, helped arrange everything. The house went for a decent amount of money, not huge, but enough to cover the remainder of the mortgage and leave money for a fresh start. The buyers, a young couple with a child, had already toured it last week, and Tom had heard the woman rave about the cozy area and potential. He grinned to himself, then let them do what they want with him. He doesn't need it anymore. Tom walked through the rooms one last time, checking to see if he had forgotten anything. In the corner of the bedroom lay an old hammer, the same one he used to make Abby's shelves. He picked it up, turned it over in his hands, feeling the familiar weight, and put it in his backpack. This was the only thing he decided to take with him. The rest furniture, dishes, her forgotten magazines he either sold or threw away. The past must remain here. When he walked out onto the porch, Mrs. Rose was already waiting in her sedan. She was holding a folder with documents and smiling, as if she was seeing off her son to a new life. "Everything is signed, Tom," she said, handing him a copy. "The money will be in your account tomorrow. Are you sure you won't change your mind?" "I'm sure," he nodded, taking the papers. "Thank you, Mrs. Rose." "Good luck to you," she said, getting into the car. "Build something good in a new place." She left, leaving him alone. Tom took one last look at the house, at the peeling paint, at the rickety porch, and got into his pickup truck. The engine began to purr, and he set off without looking back. It was the end of one chapter, bitter, but complete. The next day, Tom went to look at the site near the river, which he had his eye on a month ago. He found an advertisement in the local newspaper, "Plot for sale, 2 acres, near the river, quiet place," and immediately realized that this was what he needed. The money from the sale of the house gave him an opportunity, and he was not going to miss it. The site was 15 miles from Buckley, behind the hills, where the silence was broken only by birds and the sound of water. When he first arrived there, he immediately imagined a house simple, wooden, with a veranda overlooking the river and a workshop in the corner. This was his dream, which he had once drawn in a notebook, and now it was becoming a reality. The seller, an elderly farmer named Jackson, met him at the fence. He was a thin man with a gray beard and hands roughened from working on the land. "Well, Tom, will you take it?" he asked, nodding towards the site. "The place is good. I've been fishing here all my life. It's a pity to sell, but my sons are in the city, and I can't cope alone." "I'll take it," Tom answered, looking around the ground. "How many?" 10,000, Jackson said. "And consider that I'm giving it away for free. The land is flat, the river is clean. Build whatever you want." Tom nodded, holding out his hand. The deal was simple. He signed the papers right there on the hood of Jackson's pickup and handed over the check. When the farmer left, Tom was left alone, walking across his new land. The grass was tall but not overgrown, and the river flowed calmly, reflecting the clouds. He breathed in the air fresh, with a slight taste of water and earth, and felt something click inside, like a nail driven into the right place. It was his. Not someone else's, not shared, but only his. He returned to the truck, pulled out a notebook, and began to draw. A simple house, one bedroom, a kitchen with a large stove, a living room with windows overlooking the river, a workshop nearby. Nothing superfluous, but everything your own. He estimated the dimensions, materials pine, concrete for the foundation, slate for the roof. It wouldn't be soon. First he had to level the area and lay the foundation, but he knew he could handle it. Work was his element, and now he built not for someone, but for himself. In the evening, he stopped by Harry to tell him about the purchase. The old man's cottage was almost ready. The walls were standing, the roof was covered. All that remained was to finish the veranda and interior decoration. Harry sat on the porch with Alice next to him, a sketchbook on her lap. She was drawing something with her head bowed and her dark brown hair falling over her face. Tom felt his heart skip a beat. Over the course of this year, she had become more than just Harry's granddaughter to him. Their meetings on the farm, conversations by the river, her smile, all this quietly but surely filled the void left by Abby. "Hi, Tom," Harry said, waving his hand. "Why are you so happy?" "I bought a plot," Tom answered, sitting down on the step. "By the river, 2 acres. I sold the old house today." Harry whistled and Alice looked up from her album, smiling. "Seriously," she said. "This is great. Congratulations." "Thank you," Tom nodded, feeling her smile warming him. "Now I'll start building. I want my own house from scratch." "Well done, lad," said Harry, rubbing his chin. "A new start is right, and Alice and I will help you if anything happens. I can paint the walls," Alice winked, "or at least make coffee while you hammer in nails." Tom grinned as he looked at her. "Agreed," he said. "Coffee is important." They sat for a while longer, chatting about the construction site. Harry told how he was building a barn when he was young and almost dropped it on himself, and Alice showed a sketch of a cottage almost finished, with a veranda and a sunset in the background. Tom looked at the drawing, at her thin fingers, stained with pastel, and thought that she had already become a part of his life. Not intrusive, not demanding, but natural, like a river flowing next to his new site. When he got ready to leave, Alice came out to accompany him to the pickup truck. "Are you really happy?" she asked, looking at him with her green eyes. "True," he answered, opening the door. "It's like breathing again." She nodded as if she understood. "I'm happy for you, Tom," she said quietly. "If anything happens, call me to the station. I want to see what you build there. Come whenever you want. You know I'm always glad to see you." The evening sun turned the Tulsa skyline a pale pink as Abby returned to Brad's empty house, keys clutched in her trembling hand. She was tired, her head hurt from the loud music in the club where they had been just an hour ago, and there was a lump in her throat. Just a day ago, she thought she was living a dream, a luxurious mansion, beautiful dresses, expensive restaurants. But the longer she stayed here, the more obvious it became that all these external attributes were just ostentatious luxury, behind which stood a cold, calculating person. She slammed the front door, leaned back against it, and closed her eyes, trying to calm the growing feeling of panic. In the afternoon, she received the results of her blood test. Pregnancy. 2 lines on the test, confirmed by medical tests. The same news that could become happiness in another life. But now there was no joy. There was fear and despair. She remembered how in the hospital she could barely hold back her tears when the doctor told her in a soft voice that the period was short, but everything was definitely confirmed. Previously, Abby might have dreamed of having a child, but not with Brad, and certainly not in such circumstances. Footsteps heard in the corridor interrupted her thoughts. Brad appeared, tall, in a perfectly fitting suit, with a cigar in his hand. He frowned slightly when he saw her worried face. "Why are you like this?" he asked, not showing even the slightest concern. "Tired?" Abby clenched her fists, steeling herself. She had already tried to start this conversation on the phone during the day, but Brad replied that he was busy in negotiations and quickly hung up. Now she decided to say everything directly. "Brad, I need to talk to you. This is important." He grinned and put out his cigar in the ashtray standing on the glass table. "Speak," he said as if he was doing her a favor. Her heart was pounding as if she was about to jump off a cliff. She took a breath, feeling her insides tighten. "I'm pregnant," she said, trying to keep her voice even. For a brief moment, Brad's eyes flashed with amazement, but it was immediately replaced by cold disdain. He tilted his head as if trying to comprehend what he had heard and grinned at the corner of his mouth. "Pregnant?" he asked again, pronouncing this word with a drawn-out intonation. "And what do you expect from me?" Abby expected a range of reactions: shock, anger, even rudeness, but his complete indifference struck her the most. As if she had said something completely insignificant, for example, that there was no milk in the refrigerator. "What do you mean? What am I waiting for?" she asked, feeling her voice begin to tremble. "This is your child, our child." Brad exhaled loudly, sat down on the sofa, and leaned back, stretching his legs forward. "Listen, Abby," he said, looking at her as if he were talking to a stubborn teenager. "I didn't plan on having children. I don't need it. You want to keep it your business. But don't think I'm going to play daddy." She came closer, looking in despair at his indifferent face. "But this is your child, Brad. How can you—" "I can," he interrupted sharply. "Listen, I said right away that I was not ready for serious obligations. You were good for parties, for sex, for fun, but I'm not going to start a family. If you want to give birth, give birth. I'm ready to shell out some money, within reason." The words, "good for parties," hurt Abby's ego. What she hated most was feeling used. And now this is exactly what was happening. In just a few seconds, this man reduced their entire relationship to empty pleasure, without even trying to hide his contempt for her news. "What amount?" she asked, barely catching her breath. "You know that a child is not just a matter of spending money." "How much alimony?" he shrugged, "taking into account the fact that we were not married, and in general, this is all your decision. I will give you money for the procedure if you decide not to give birth. If not, there will be a minimum wage, and that's it. Don't expect more." Abby's throat tightened and tears welled up in her eyes, but she didn't want to cry in front of him. I didn't want to show weakness. She understood that he had always been cold, but she hoped that pregnancy would somehow awaken responsibility in him. Her hopes crumbled before her eyes. "Are you? Are you serious?" she whispered, knowing the answer, but not daring to believe it. Brad stood up and walked around the room, as if she was already tired of him. Then he grinned. "Yes, seriously. If you want to leave, leave. I'll transfer the money. You can challenge something in court, but believe me, I have good lawyers. You won't get too much." She stood there, feeling how everything inside her was shrinking with despair. A few months ago, she left Tom, although not rich, but loving to escape into the world of luxury and wealth. And where did this lead her? To someone else's mansion, to a man who looks at her like she's empty space. "I'll leave," she said, trying to keep her voice firm. "But I'll come back for my things." Brad shrugged and took his phone out of his pocket. "It's up to you," he muttered, dialing someone's number. "Just don't make a scene, and close the door behind you." Abby turned and walked out of the room, clutching the handle of her purse tightly. Anger and pain were mixed. The pulse reverberated in his temples. She went into the bedroom, quickly collected the essentials documents, some clothes, cosmetics, and threw everything into a small travel bag. Feelings changed one after another: humiliation, anger, fear. Her pride did not allow her to linger here and try to beg Brad for something. She knew only one thing: she would give birth to a child. Deep down, she understood that pregnancy was not just a mistake, but a living future child. A muffled no in response to Brad's offer to pay for the operation was enough for him not to even try to argue. He simply waved his hand and continued his telephone conversation. When she left the house, it was already dark. In the taxi she hailed right on the road, Abby sat, clutching her bag to her chest, wondering where she should go now. Heading back to Buckley, to this remote town where she fled, hoping for a better life, or stay in Tulsa and rent some modest apartment. But all she had left was the money that she had managed to save during her short time working in a local beauty salon and modest savings on her card. This is enough for a couple of months of rent, and then somewhere on the outskirts. The taxi stopped at a cheap motel, and the driver announced the amount. Abby paid, feeling the pitiful remnants of her savings melt away before her eyes. She climbed the creaky steps to the second floor and rented a room for the night in cash. The cramped room smelled of stale tobacco smoke and cheap air fresheners. After locking the door, Abby kicked off her shoes and sank onto the bed, clutching her stomach with her hand. The thought of a tiny life beginning to beat inside her was both frightening and touching. She spent the whole night awake, looking at the spotted ceiling. At some point in the morning, she fell asleep and had a nightmare. Brad was laughing at her, Tom was standing aside, turning away, and a child was crying next to her. She woke up in a cold sweat. The clock showed 6 in the morning. The sun had barely risen, painting the sky in pale lilac tones. Abby stood up, washed her face in the cramped bathroom, and looked at her reflection in the mirror. Her eyes were red from tears and fatigue, and dark circles appeared on her face. What should I do? She thought. There was little choice. Brad clearly didn't want to see her, and it was useless to fight him for large alimony payments. His lawyers will crush her in no time, and I didn't have the strength to go to court right now. She remembered Buckley, the small town where her old home remained. This place seemed like a hole to her, but now, after such a blow of fate, Buckley acquired a new meaning. At least she had friends there. Sarah, although with snobbish tendencies, was still a friend. Maybe he'll take it back. What if not? Abby asked herself in a whisper, clutching the edge of the sink. She sat down on the bed and took out her phone. There were no messages from Brad, and she didn't expect them. I dialed Sarah's number. The beeps sounded in silence for a long time. Finally, her friend's sleepy voice answered. Hello, Abby. Where have you gone? The warmth of the familiar voice softened the tension in Abby's chest, and she began to speak, overcoming her shame. She told everything briefly, about the pregnancy, about Brad's reaction, about the lack of money, and about the fact that she doesn't know where to go. Sarah was silent for a long time, and then said quietly, Come to Buckley. At least here you will have a place to stay. I'll figure something out with the work. Abby's throat tightened with gratitude. Thank you, Sar, she whispered. I don't know what I would do without you. Come on, my friend sighed. I'm honestly shocked by your story, but I can't leave you with the child. Come, let's talk. The warm sun filled the air over the hills beyond Buckley as Tom inserted the last nail into the frame of the future veranda. The wooden boards smelled pleasantly of freshly planted pine, and this aroma merged with the smell of flowering meadows. There was silence all around, only occasionally broken by the singing of birds or the distant roar of a tractor. The same riverside plot that Tom bought after selling his old house was gradually turning into the place he had dreamed of all his life. Over the past months, he worked tirelessly, leveling the ground, laying foundations, erecting walls. First alone, then he hired a couple of guys to help, and when the need arose for more delicate work with wood, Matt got involved. But the main inspiration was Alice, Harry's granddaughter. With her, it all started with friendship, with warm conversations and joint gatherings by the river, and then grew into something more. Today, she drove up to him in her green Beetle, parking at the temporary chain-link gate. Tom heard the engine howl and smiled, straightening up to meet her. Alice jumped out of the car, holding a paper bag with lunch in her hands and a bag of brushes and paints dangling behind her. Hello, Builder, she said, approaching him and giving him a radiant smile. I thought you were hungry. Hello, artist, he replied, wiping his hands with a rag. I'm really dying of hunger. Thanks for stopping by. She handed him the package. Inside were 2 turkey sandwiches, apples, and a thermos of coffee. Tom felt his heart swell with tenderness. Over the past months, this woman has become a ray of light for him. Her smile, her support, her kindness, all this helped him forget his past pain. He was in no hurry to confess, afraid of getting burned, but she herself, step by step, revealed to him that trust was still possible. "How's the progress?" Alice asked, looking around the newly built walls. "Is everything going according to plan?" Tom nodded, pointing to the veranda. "All that's left is to nail down the boards, put them on the roof, and soon we can start decorating the inside." Matt said he would bring new materials in a week. Alice walked along the walls, running her fingers along the wood as if caressing it. Sometimes Tom thought that she treated the building with the same reverence as her paintings. She saw it as a living form. "Wonderful," she said, turning to him. "And then, when everything is ready, you will look at the river from this veranda and enjoy the sunsets." "Not alone," he added quietly, looking into her eyes. She came closer, and he smelled her scent. Light, floral, with a hint of menthol. She touched his hand. "Yes," she said also quietly, "not alone." They shared lunch, sitting upright on the rough boards of the future veranda with their legs dangling. The river was murmuring somewhere below. The sun was warmly warm. Tom talked about the project, how he plans to arrange the living room and bedroom, and Alice shared ideas for decorating the walls. She wanted to paint wall panels with natural motifs, something like stylized tree branches or silhouettes of birds. "Let's make the house breathe beauty," she said, gesturing with enthusiasm. "And your hand is on every board, and mine is in these drawings." Tom nodded, smiling. His heart was filled with a warm feeling. It seemed to him that they had found an amazing harmony. He was a carpenter, building a strong frame, and she was an artist, giving comfort and soul. This harmony was like the music they composed together. The more time they spent together, the stronger their connection became. And today, under the gentle sun, Tom decided on what he had been preparing for in recent weeks. He felt that with Alice, he wanted to move on in life, to build not only a house, but also a future. Recently, he even secretly went to a neighboring town and bought a ring modest, with a small stone, but for him it symbolized not a price, but a promise. When dinner was finished, and Alice leaned back on the boards, closing her eyes, he quietly took the box out of his pocket. His heart was pounding in his chest as if he was a 20-year-old boy on his first date again. His last marriage to Abby had ended bitterly, but now, with Alice, things were different. He was sure of this. "Alice," he called softly, and she turned her head towards him. "Yes," she asked, opening her eyes slightly. He felt his throat go dry, but it was too late to retreat. "I wanted to tell you something. And, show." She sat up, furrowing her brows as she noticed his tension. "Did something happen?" "No," he smiled, although he was trembling inside. "On the contrary, everything is fine. Very good." He opened a small velvet box, and the sun slid across a silver ring with a tiny but shining stone. "Alice," he said, trying not to lose his temper, "I never would have thought that after everything that has happened in my life, I would be able to trust someone again. But you showed me what real support, kindness, understanding means. You have become for me the person with whom I want to share every day. You help me breathe and dream, and he swallowed the lump in his throat. "I want to ask you to become my wife, if you agree." Alice froze for a moment, and then so many emotions flashed on her face: surprise, joy, excitement. She covered her mouth with her hand, and tears sparkled in her green eyes. "Oh God, Tom," she whispered, looking first at the ring, then at him. Are you serious?" He smiled, realizing how trivial this phrase sounded, but at the same time realizing how important it was. "Yes," he answered. "This is not a spontaneous decision. I love you, Alice. I want to be with you, walk next to you, build further not just a house, but my whole life." She didn't make him wait for an answer. The next second she rushed to him, throwing her arms around his neck and hugging him tightly. Happy tears flowed down her cheeks. "Of course, yes," she said between sighs and kisses. "Tom, I love you too. It's so fast, but I'm sure, I'm 100% sure." He laughed with relief as he felt the tension leave his muscles. They sat there, hugging each other, while the breeze caressed their faces. Then he carefully put the ring on her finger it fit, because he knew her size in advance. Alice herself looked at him without taking her eyes off, as if she was afraid that this was a dream. But it was not a dream, but reality, warm, bright, and full of promises for the future. What about Harry? She suddenly remembered, straightening up. Will he be happy? He's been hinting at me for a long time, Tom admitted. He said it was time to make a decision. I think your grandfather will be happy. A light morning fog swirled over the river, covering the banks with a whitish haze. Tom stood on the veranda of his almost completed house and watched the first rays of the sun break through the trees, illuminating the water with a golden light. Today was that very day, the day of his wedding with Alice. He felt an excitement in his chest that he had not experienced for a long time, a pleasant trembling and the realization that life was changing dramatically. On the veranda, there were several benches for guests, decorated with wildflowers. The table with light snacks stood slightly to the side, covered with a white tablecloth. Everything was simple and modest, just as they wanted. Harry promised to come a little later along with Matt, who volunteered to be the driver and at the same time grab some groceries. Tom leaned back on the railing and breathed in the cool air. Over the last couple of days, Alice had come over and helped hang the flower garlands, arrange the candles, and set up the area for the small ceremony. They decided that everything would take place here on the veranda overlooking the river. After this, guests will move to Harry's farm, where a small festive table will be held. Volume. Matt's voice was heard from the path. Is anyone home? Tom turned around and smiled when he saw a pickup truck approaching, with crates of fruit and drinks in the back. Matt came out of the cabin, red-haired and always smiling. Harry slowly climbed out next to him, leaning on a cane, but he looked cheerful. Good morning. Tom waved his hand, going down the steps towards them. How did you get there? Great, Matt replied, slamming the door. Now we'll unload everything. Harry took a deep breath and looked at Tom with a warm smile. Boy, are you happy today, right? Tom nodded as he helped unload the boxes. I would be lying if I said I wasn't worried. But yes, I'm happy. Soon Alice appeared, arriving with her friend Liana, who volunteered to help with the organization. Alice wore a simple but elegant white dress, decorated with floral elements that she had drawn herself. She seemed weightless like the summer wind. Seeing Tom, she smiled so that his heart was filled with warmth. Hello, groom, she said, coming closer. Ready? He caught her gaze and responded with a smile. Always with you. Together they checked whether everything was in place, whether there were snacks, whether the flowers were arranged. There were about 10 guests waiting. Close friends, a couple of Alice's relatives from Tulsa, several of Harry's neighbors. Everyone was supposed to arrive by noon. Harry stood on the sidelines, watching the young people fuss about, and chuckled from time to time. It's not every day you see a groom carrying crates of fruit himself on his wedding day, he teased. When the clock hands approached 12, the first cars began to drive up. Alice's friends, including a couple of her art classmates, brought a bouquet of wildflowers and a guitar to play a romantic tune for them. Harry's neighbors, the Turners, brought a large blueberry pie. The atmosphere was festive but relaxed. Everyone smiled, hugged, and wished for happiness. Tom changed into a light shirt and trousers, which he saved especially for such occasions, and Alice put on her dress, complementing the look with a wreath of wildflowers. She left her hair loose, and light waves fell on her shoulders. Harry, standing in the shadow of the porch, quietly whispered to Tom, "She's beautiful, mate. Take care of her." The small ceremony began with the accompaniment of a guitar. Alice walked to the veranda arm in arm with Harry, who playfully complained that her granddaughter was walking too fast, and he, the old man, had to keep up. But in the eyes of the old man one could read pride and tears of joy. Tom stood at a makeshift arch, 2 columns decorated with flowers, knocked together by himself. As Alice approached, he felt his heart pounding like an excited schoolboy. Tom, she said quietly, holding out her hand to him, I know we went through a lot before we met, and I know that I want to share with you all the joys and difficulties that life brings. He squeezed her hand, feeling warmth and sincerity. Alice, he replied, you have become a light for me in a dark time. I am. grateful to fate that we found each other. They exchanged rings, which Tom ordered from a local jeweler. Simple, no frills, but with initials engraved inside. When Alice put the ring on Tom's finger, her eyes sparkled with tears of joy. Shy friend Matt, who volunteered to be the host of the ceremony, declared them husband and wife, involuntarily blushing at his own words. "You can kiss the bride," he added with an embarrassed chuckle. Tom leaned down, touched Alice's lips, and at that moment it seemed as if the whole world was holding its breath. It was a gentle, warm kiss, sealing their decision to walk hand in hand. The guests applauded, someone shouted, "Hooray!" and the sounds of the guitar were animatedly repeated. After the ceremony on the veranda, everyone sat down at makeshift tables and began to congratulate the newlyweds. Harry, raising a glass of lemonade, made a speech. "Tom and Alice, I've lived for so many years, I've seen a lot of things. But every time I see two people find each other, I believe that life continues and is renewed. I wish you a long journey where you will build not only homes, but also memories. And may you always remember that the main support is love." Everyone applauded again, and Alice, wiping away her tears, hugged her grandfather. Then Liana, Alice's friend, stood up and said that she had never seen her so happy. The guests drank soft drinks, enjoyed pies, and exchanged stories. Matt amused everyone with stories from the construction site, and one of his artist friends suggested making a small sketch of the bride and groom right on the spot. Tom felt his soul filled with joy. At some point, he took Alice a little to the side, watching how the sun brightly illuminated her face. "Thank you for agreeing to marry me," he said quietly. "I will do everything to make you happy." She smiled, straightening the collar of his shirt. "I'm already happy." He held her close to him, feeling her heartbeat next to his. At that moment, he clearly understood that all the shadows of the past had finally dissipated. Here, on the veranda, with the river behind them, they stood like free people, ready to start a new page. Several months have passed since the wedding. The river house that Tom and Alice had built and furnished together now looked almost finished. Inside there were simple but cozy furniture, shelves made by Tom's hands, and several paintings of Alice on the walls. Every corner breathed the warmth of their joint work and love. Harry came less and less often. His age was making itself felt. But when he appeared, he always joked that he still had time to celebrate the birth of their 10th child, and that he needed time to rock his great-great-grandson in his arms. Alice laughed at his jokes, and Tom agreed, although deep down he was worried about the old man. Harry looked increasingly tired, sometimes walking heavily on his cane, but pride and perseverance did not allow him to complain. Autumn in Buckley was mild, with golden leaves on the trees and cool nights. Alice went to Tulsa for an exhibition of her paintings, and her work received good reviews. Tom continued to take orders for the construction of small projects, barns, porches, summer houses. And when there were no clients, he devoted time to arranging his plot, planting trees, creating a small garden. One of these days, when the sun dropped to the horizon and the breeze moved the branches of the maple tree near the porch, the bell rang. Tom, putting down his tools, heard Alice calling him from the house. He realized from the voice that something had happened. When he entered, she was standing with the phone in her hand, and there was concern in her eyes. "It was Harry's neighbor who called," she said, barely containing the trembling in her voice. "Grandfather feels bad. He's in the hospital." Tom felt his heart clench. In their lives, Harry was a support, a wise mentor, a kind grandfather, without whom they could not imagine their little world. He quickly took off his work clothes, grabbed his jacket, and they rushed to the hospital together. At the emergency room, they were informed that Harry was in serious condition. "Doctors are trying, but he has a weak heart, and his age does not give him a chance for a quick recovery." Alice pressed herself close to Tom, and he hugged her, trying to give her courage, although he himself felt a lump in his throat. "Can I see him?" Alice asked, barely waiting for the nurse to allow it. "Please." They were allowed to enter the room one by one. Alice entered first, and Tom remained in the corridor, nervously clasping his hands. About 10 minutes later, she came out, her eyes red from tears. "He's calling you," she whispered. Tom nodded and entered. Harry lay in a hospital bed on a drip with an oxygen mask. Seeing Tom, he smiled slightly at the corners of his lips. "Hey, guy," he said weakly, but tried to sound cheerful. "Have you come to see the old man?" Tom came closer and sat down on a chair next to him. "Of course, Harry," he said, trying to smile. "Tell me, what do the doctors say?" The old man shrugged his shoulders weakly. "What can they say? My heart is acting up, and that's all. I I felt it, but I didn't think that I would fall so quickly." Tom covered his hand with his palm. Harry was as strong as ever, but the strength seemed to be draining from him. "Hold on, Harry," Tom said quietly. "We haven't finished your veranda yet." The old man closed his eyes and then looked at Tom carefully. "Listen to me, boy. I already realize that my time is running out, and I'm not afraid. I just want you and Alice to know that the farm I have is yours. All savings, too. I wrote a will." Tom felt tears begin to burn in his eyes. He and Alice never thought of money or the farm as property, but always thought of it as Harry's home. "Harry, you'll still live. Why?" "Quiet," the old man interrupted him. "There is no need for false hope. When I'm gone, I want the farm to pass into your hands. Alice is my granddaughter. She knows everything. You will do with the farm as you see fit. Maybe you'll sell it, maybe you'll keep it. But let this help you in life. And also," he reached under the sheet with his hand and took out a small box. "This is for you. You'll open it later when I'm no longer there." Tom took the box, feeling empty. "Don't say that, Harry," he managed. "Please stay. Alice." "I know, but you can't fool anyone's son. Go away, call Alice. I want to say goodbye, and you live with dignity. I always respected you, remember?" Tom didn't know what to answer. He leaned down and lightly touched Harry's hand, feeling a suffocating feeling rise in his throat. Then he walked out, letting Alice through. She stayed in the ward for about half an hour. When she came out, she was in tears and pressed a handkerchief to her lips. "He fell asleep," was all she said. Tom hugged her, and they stood there without saying a word. The feeling of loss was already weighing heavily. That night they sat in the hospital corridor, afraid to leave. Around 3 o'clock in the morning, doctors reported that Harry had died in his sleep. Alice burst into tears, clinging to Tom. He himself could barely hold back his tears. The following days passed in the turmoil of preparations for the funeral. Familiar farmers, neighbors, and friends came. Everyone said that Harry was a good man, wise, kind, and hardworking. Alice, her eyes red from tears, accepted condolences, and Tom helped her with all the organizational aspects. They buried Harry in a small cemetery next to his wife, Mary. Another year and a half has passed since Harry's death. The house by the river finally acquired its completed appearance. Light walls, a spacious veranda, Tom's workshop, and a room that Alice intended as a nursery. Life flowed smoothly. Tom continued to take orders for construction and renovation, and Alice painted, occasionally traveling to Tulsa for small exhibitions. The funds left by Harry helped them feel more confident, and they gradually settled into the farm, not constantly, but so that the place was not empty. And then the news came. Alice was expecting a baby. She told Tom about this one evening when they were having dinner in the kitchen. Tom, hearing her words, "We are having a baby," experienced incredible joy and slight trepidation. He jumped up from his chair, hugged her tightly, almost throwing her into the air, and she laughed through tears of happiness. What they talked about half-jokingly has now become a reality. Alice's pregnancy was relatively calm. Sometimes she had attacks of nausea in the morning. Sometimes she had pain in her lower back. But Tom tried to take care of her. He brought warm compresses and prepared breakfast. He felt that he was obliged to help her in everything, because she was carrying a new life, their son or daughter. Doctors confirmed that it was a boy, and Tom remembered Alice's words about naming him Harry in honor of his grandfather. He agreed, considering it the best way to honor the old man's memory. The months passed, the child grew, and together they prepared the children's room. They painted the walls in a soft greenish shade, painted on one wall a tree with birds that seemed to be chirping above the crib. Alice showed her talent as an artist, and it turned out to be a nice corner where you could feel a light fairy tale atmosphere. Tom, not to be outdone, made a wooden cradle with carved patterns. He turned out the details in the evenings, trying to make sure that every line was smooth and the design was reliable. When the cradle was ready, Alice looked at it with tears in her eyes. "This is so beautiful, Tom," she said, touching her hand to the carved edge where the silhouettes of leaves were cut out. "Our baby will sleep here, feeling your warmth." The birth occurred late at night. Alice woke Tom by squeezing his hand and gasping for breath. She said she felt contractions. Tom stood up as if in alarm, quickly packed her bag, and helped her get into the car. The road to the local maternity hospital took about half an hour, but it seemed like an eternity to him. He grabbed the steering wheel, asking from time to time if everything was okay. Alice, gritting her teeth, nodded, trying to breathe evenly. At the maternity hospital, they were met by a nurse who took Alice into the room and told Tom to wait outside the door. Those hours that he sat in the corridor seemed like a nightmare to him in the sense that time dragged on endlessly, and he could not help. He heard moans, screams, negotiations between doctors, and muttered prayers under his breath. At some point, he remembered his own past. He never thought that he would become a father. And now, somewhere behind the wall, his wife is giving birth to their son. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the doctor came out to him with a smile. "Congratulations, you are having a boy," she said, patting Tom on the shoulder. "Mom is feeling well, a little more, and you'll be able to visit them." Tom's heart seemed to jump. Boy, his son. He walked into the room, pushing aside the curtain with a trembling hand, and saw Alice, pale but smiling, and a tiny baby wrapped in a blanket. The boy was tiny, with dark hair and wrinkles on his face. "Tom," Alice whispered, "meet your son." He carefully took the baby in his arms, afraid that he would make an awkward movement, and felt a miracle. A tiny body, so warm and defenseless, looked at him with its eyes, which were not yet able to focus. Tom couldn't hold back his tears. It was stronger than him. He leaned over and whispered, "Hello, Harry." Alice laughed quietly, seeing how her husband, this strong carpenter, could not hide his emotions. "Thank you, Alice," he said as she approached, finally putting the baby down, "for bringing so much light into my life." She sat down next to him and laid her head on his shoulder. "And I am grateful to you." They sat in silence, listening to Harry sniffle in the nursery. The river roared outside the window, and the stars twinkled in the sky. And in this invisible harmony, two people who went through losses and searches finally found peace in small joys and new worries. While peace and joy reigned in the house by the river, Abby lived a completely different life. After the birth of her son, she felt all the hardships of single motherhood. She named the boy Jake. The first months were difficult for her. Sleepless nights, lack of money, constant worries about the future. Returning to work at the salon soon after giving birth, she encountered disapproval from some clients, saying, "How can you go to work so quickly when the child is not even 6 months old?" But she had no choice. Little Jake stayed with a neighbor granny who looked after him for little money while Abby cut and dyed his hair at the salon. The baby cried at night, she didn't get enough sleep, and went to work again in the morning. Brad's money was ridiculous, only enough for a couple of cans of baby food and diapers, and all other expenses fell on her shoulders. Sometimes Abby remembered how she lived in Tulsa in a luxurious mansion and smiled bitterly it all turned out to be empty tinsel. Now she had neither a mansion, nor a relationship, nor any prospects. Closer to Jake's 6 months, she realized that living in a small outbuilding without normal conditions would become impossible. The child was growing, he needed a normal crib, a place to crawl. Having somehow saved up a small amount, she rented a room in an old apartment closer to the center of Buckley, which at least had its own bathroom. But even there, the conditions left much to be desired. The pipes were leaking, the walls were covered with mold, and the owner of the house constantly complained about the noise of the child. but there was no other option. Several times she thought about moving to another city, starting over from scratch. But I understood that with a child and without money, it would be suicide. Friend Sarah helped in any way she could. She would either bring new clothes for Jake or provide moral support. But Sarah herself did not live well and could not support another family. Sometimes Abby saw Tom and Alice on the street. The first time she went out to the store with a stroller and accidentally noticed a couple. Alice was pushing a stroller with their baby, and Tom walked next to him, leaning over, laughing about something. Abby's heart sank. They seemed like a happy family, and she couldn't help but feel a pang inside her. It was as if she subconsciously compared herself. Alone, with a stroller, without prospects, and they are together, supporting each other. She hid behind parked cars, not daring to show herself. What would she tell them? Hi, I also have a child, but my life is a complete disaster. She chose a different path and didn't want to complain, and her pride prevented her from admitting her mistake to Tom. Jake grew up, learned to sit and crawl. Every time he smiled at her, Abby felt a surge of happiness, as if forgetting about hopelessness. She told herself, "For his sake, I will endure everything. I will find a way to get out of the impasse." But so far, no miracle has happened. I had to cling to any opportunity to earn money, stay in the salon longer, take on additional part-time jobs at a nearby manicure salon. She was sorely lacking sleep and strength. Often she remembered Tom and thought, if I had not left then, everything would have been different. We would have a home, albeit a modest one, and maybe a child would be born in love. But then she reproached herself, trying to drown out these thoughts. After all, there was no turning back, and now it was important to survive and not think about the past. One day, she came across Tom almost face to face. He apparently left the hardware store, and she left the pharmacy nearby, where she bought medicine for Jake. They locked eyes, standing literally 2 meters from each other. Tom noticeably tensed and stopped. There was surprise and perhaps sympathy in his eyes after all. He saw that she was with a stroller, looked tired, and was wearing a cheap coat. "Hi," Tom managed, smiling weakly. How? How are you?" Her throat tightened. She didn't know what to say. "Okay," she would have said earlier out of pride, but it would have sounded absurd at the sight of her tired face. Finally, she squeezed out, "Fine." And then she lowered her eyes. "How are you?" Also, "Good," Tom answered, noticing the stroller and the child in it. "Is this your son?" Abby nodded. "Jake. He is already 10 months old." Tom ran his hand over the back of his head, not knowing how to react. He may have thought the baby was Brad's, and it was. Silence hung, oppressive. She understood that she could not say anything in her own defense. "I didn't intend to." All she had was a child and a pitiful hope for a better future. "I'm glad." "For you," Tom said quietly, although his gaze betrayed a double feeling. "Okay, I have to go." He nodded as if he wanted to say goodbye and walked to the car. Abby remained standing. As he drove away, she felt tears welling up in her eyes. "I'm happy for you." How little and how much is said in these words. Maybe he's really happy, or maybe he just doesn't know what to say. But one thing is clear, there is an abyss between them, and there is no return. So she continued her struggle alone. Sarah told her sometimes that Tom and Alice were doing well, that they had a baby boy, also around the time Jake arrived. Abby listened to this with a mixture of envy and pain, but said nothing. She acquired her usual shell, every day to work, then to see the child, then to work again. Sometimes in the evenings, when Jake fell asleep, she sat in silence, thinking that perhaps she had made the wrong choice after all. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.